No one knew why he did it. Wealthy man, respected, admired, suddenly took his 5-year-old twin sons deep into the woods and vanished. No explanation, no trace. In the cold morning mist, with only the wind whispering through the trees, the two little boys sat shivering, lost, hungry, and utterly alone. But then, from beyond the shadowy tree line, something emerged. Not a person, not a predator, but a mysterious white Mustang horse. What happened next is something few would believe. Before we dive into the full story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. Dawn crept over Grant family estate, casting a pale ribbon of light through the high frosted windows. Two identical halos of blonde curls pressed close for warmth. A gentle knock broke the hush. The door opened and Richard Grant filled the frame, tall, immaculate, and oddly tense. He cleared his throat, voice low but firm. "Up you get, boys, we've got a special trip ahead of us." Ethan's eyes snapped open. He sat up, bright and eager. "Really, Dad, no meetings today?" Finn followed more slowly, clutching a battered teddy bear. His wide eyes searched his father's face for clues. Richard mustered a tight smile that never reached his eye. "No meetings," he said, turning back toward the hall. "Dress quickly." Excitement and confusion mixed in the children's chests. Richard Grant, whose days were ruled by boardrooms, whose evenings vanished behind a study door, had never offered a day out. Ethan scrambled for his jeans, babbling questions. Finn buttoned his shirt in silence, gaze lingering on the door their father had left ajar. Maggie Thompson, the gray-hailed housekeeper who had nursed the twins since infancy, set 2 plates on the long oak table. She looked up as Richard descended the staircase with the boys in tow, a small duffel bag swinging from one hand. Maggie wiped her hands on her apron. "Mr. Grant, are you sure everything's all right this morning?" Richard barely paused. "Just taking them out for air, Maggie. They need to see the world beyond these walls." Maggie's brows knit. She had endured years of silent orders and cold dinners, but the specter of those children disappearing into the unknown pricked a deeper worry. As Finn passed, she crouched to straighten the scarf at his throat. "Be careful, Angel," she whispered, brushing a kiss across his hair. Richard herded the boys to the front foyer. No hugs, no playful ruffle of hair. He opened the heavy door as if it were just another meeting room and gestured them forward. Ethan turned, waving at Maggie with exuberance of someone convinced the day would be marvelous. She waved back, forcing a smile that faltered the moment the door shut. Outside, a black SUV idled on the gravel drive, breathy clouds of exhaust curling in the chill air. Richard buckled Ethan into the back seat, then Finn still clutching the teddy. He slid behind the wheel, the leather creaking under his weight, and without another word pressed the accelerator. The vehicle glided past manicured hedges and through wrought iron gates, leaving only a ghostly swirl of dust. Maggie stood at the parlor window, fingers pressed to the cool glass, watching the rear lights shrink. A knot of dread tightened in her chest, unnamed but persistent. Behind her, the kitchen clock ticked on, marking a new day that felt suddenly and horribly out of step. Down the long private lane, the twins leaned toward the tinted windows, marveling at the mauve sky above, rolling pasture. Ethan's voice danced inside the car. "Are we going to the seaside, Dad, or a carnival?" Richard's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. "Somewhere you've never been," he said, the words clipped. Final. Finn hugged his bear tighter. The thrill of an unexpected adventure shifted to something less certain. He glanced at Ethan, who, sensing his brother's worry, offered a quick grin. But even Ethan's smile faded when he noticed his father's white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel, and the way Richard checked his watch every few minutes, as though running behind an unseen schedule. The sun climbed higher, but its warmth never reached the inside of the SUV. Silence pooled. Fields gave way to sparse woodland, then dense forest. Gravel became dirt, dirt narrowed into a ribbon of rough track. Branches brushed the roof with brittle fingers. Finally, Richard braked in a small clearing, saplings hemming them in. Birds scattered at the sudden intrusion. He cut the engine. The hush that followed felt unnatural. Turning, he opened the door beside Ethan. "Out, stretch your legs," he said. The twins obeyed, boots crunching dry leaves. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. Richard knelt, straightened Ethan's collar, and offered a smile so forced it trembled. "Hey, wait right here. I have a surprise for you both." Ethan's eyes lit, Finn's narrowed in suspicion. "Now where are you going, Dad?" Richard rose, avoiding the question. He climbed back into the SUV, closed the door, and with a curt nod, put the vehicle in gear. Tires turned slowly, then faster, stones popping beneath the tread. The boys watched, puzzled, as the car circled the clearing, headlights flashing briefly through trunks, before the SUV nosed onto the path and accelerated into the trees. "Dad?" Ethan shouted, breaking into a jog. Finn seized his brother's sleeve, terror blooming. The engine roar faded until only rustling leaves remained. Dust settled in the slanted sunlight like pale ash. The clearing returned to silence. Two small figures stood alone, breaths white in the cold morning. Ethan stepped forward, then stopped, fists clenched. He looked down at Finn, whose lips quivered. For the first time in their short lives, neither knew where to turn. Miles away, Maggie Thompson still stood at the window, heart pounding, a single thought echoing louder than the ticking clock. "Come back safe, little angel. Please, come back safe." A fine dust of country light drifted over the windshield, as the black SUV rolled south, away from the neat lawns of Grant Estate, and toward open pasture. In the back seat, Ethan pressed his nose to the glass, delighting in every passing shape, cattle grazing beneath cotton clouds, fence posts racing by in measured beats, a red-roofed barn that seemed to wave as it vanished behind them. "Look, Finn, did you see that cow with the white heart on its side?" Ethan chirped. Finn murmured, hardly lifting his forehead from the window. His voice was soft, almost lost in the hum of the engine. His right hand lay tense on the steering wheel, his left flicked to the rearview mirror and back to the road in restless rhythm. Every few minutes he checked his watch, a quick tilt of the wrist, eyes narrowing, jaw setting harder beneath charcoal stubble. The highway yielded to a two-lane blacktop, then to a gravel farm road. With each turn the world grew emptier. Fields gave way to thickets of pin oak and cedar, telephone poles stopped altogether, and the morning sun sank behind a bank of gray. Finn finally spoke, voice no louder than a frost-brittle leaf. "Dad, where we goin'?" Richard kept his gaze forward. "To someplace special," he said. Two clipped words that sounded rehearsed. Ethan reached across the seat to squeeze his brother's hand, trying to force a grin, but his own heart began to flutter. Something felt wrong. The way his father's shoulders never softened. The way clouds closed overhead as though turning down a dimmer switch. The cross trail cut from the gravel onto a single-track path of packed dirt. Richard turned without signaling, tires crunching over fallen cones. The SUV slipped beneath the trees, swallowed by whispering pines. Wind hissed through needles, light thinned to a pewter gloom. Ethan and Finn huddled closer. They passed no campers, no trailhead sign. Only the occasional rusted tin can nailed to a trunk, bullet-pocked and unreadable. After what felt like forever, the car eased into a clearing hardly wider than a backyard garden. Soaring pines hemmed the edges, their trunks arrow-straight and silent, dead needles quilted the ground. A single burst of goldenrod bent beneath the breeze. Richard killed the engine. The sudden hush rang in the boy's ears. He turned, lips twitching into a smile that looked painful. "Out you hop. I've got a surprise," he said, pushing Ethan's door open. Ethan jumped down, shoes sinking in the soft mat of needle. Finn followed, clutching his teddy to his chest. Both waited for explanation, but none came. The air was colder than they expected. It smelled of sap and damp moss. Richard slid the duffel from the rear seat, set it on Ethan's arms, then strode around to the driver's door again. "Daddy, what's the surprise?" Finn asked. "Have to fetch it," Richard replied. No warmth. Just impatience. "Stay here, don't wander." He climbed in, pulled the door shut, and without a second glance started the engine. The window remained up, no goodbye, no instruction beyond that flat order. The SUV rolled away, tires spinning pine needles, circling the clearing once like a predator drawing a boundary. Then, headlights flashing once through the trees, it shot back onto the narrow track and disappeared. Then the hush shattered. Ethan's voice tore through the cold. "Damn! Dan, wait!" He ran 3 steps before the duffel's strap slipped, dropping at his feet. Finn lunged, fists gripping Ethan's jacket. "Don't leave, Ethan, please don't leave me." Ethan froze, torn between pursuit and a terror in his brother's eyes. In the distance, the SUV's growl faded to a whisper, then to nothing. Only wind remained, rattling dry needles like bones. Dust settled. The clearing looked smaller, the trees taller. Ethan swallowed hard. "He'll come back," he said, though his own voice cracked around the lie. Finn's answer was a quiver of lips. The teddy bear shook inside his arms. Side by side they watched the path as if sheer will might conjure brake lights among the trunk. Nothing stirred, even birds seemed to hold their breath. Minutes bled into an hour. Neither child cried. Fear sat too thick for tears. They simply gripped each other's hands until the blood drained from their fingers. Above them clouds churned. Somewhere deep inside the wood a twig snapped. The boys jerked at the sound, hearts galloping. Ethan scanned the tree line, Finn half hid behind his brother's shoulder. Sunlight thin as gauze filtered through the pines, turning the floating dust into specks of gold. Nothing moved. Silence again, then another crackle. Close, from between two broad trunks glided a shape, tall, white, spectral in the silver dawn. A horse? No, a Mustang stepped into the clearing. With the grace of flowing water, its coat shimmered pale as moonlight. Its mane fell in ripples to one side of a proud neck. Breath curled from flared nostrils, dark intelligent eyes fixed on the children. Ethan's first instinct was awe, the second was caution. He tightened his grip on Finn. "Don't move," he whispered. The Mustang halted a dozen yards away. It did not rear, did not snort, merely cocked its head, ears twitching, studying them with calm interest. Wind swept the clearing, tossing pine needles into a brief spiral. Ethan felt Finn shiver against him. I think it's okay," Ethan ventured, voice trembling. "When are you going to allow it? And where?" "Oh, what? It isn't afraid of us," Finn hushed. Ethan didn't know. Depth. Horses at the estate always wore saddles and handlers, and never met the boys alone. This creature was different, muscles sleek beneath spotless hide, hooves square and strong, tail swishing like silk. Slowly, so slowly, Ethan barely sensed the motion. He took a step forward. The Mustang's ears flicked back, one hoof shifting, but it did not flee. Ethan paused, heart booming. Another step. The horse drew a breath, feathering its nostrils, then let it out in a low sigh almost like contentment. Finn's voice quaked. "Ethan, be careful." Ethan raised a hand. Open, empty. Pine scent mingled with the warm, earthy smell of the animal. He closed the gap until only an arm's length separated boy and beast. Up close, the Mustang's eyes were pools of deep brown flecked with amber. The horse shook its mane once, strands catching sunlight in bright white sparks. Finn, watching, managed a shaky smile. Beautiful," he whispered. The moment stretched, delicate as spider silk. Then Ethan lowered his hand, stepping back to Finn's side. The Mustang dipped its head, almost a nod, before turning to graze a patch of grass poking through the needles. All the while one ear remained tuned toward the boys. They settled beneath a pine, backs to the rough bark. The shock of abandonment hung above them like a storm cloud, yet the presence of the white horse anchored them to something solid. Minutes passed. The animal wandered in a slow semicircle, cropping sparse shoots and occasionally blowing soft huffs through its nose. No words existed for what they felt. Relief? Not quite. Safety? Perhaps. A fragile, borrowed kind supplied by a creature that owed them nothing. Ethan broke the hush first. "Maybe it lives here all alone. Like us," Finn murmured. Ethan chewed his lip. "If Dad doesn't come back," he said, voiced barely audible, I think we'll need it." Finn nodded, pressing closer. Across the clearing the Mustang raised its head, as if hearing thoughts rather than sound. For several heartbeats it held the boy's gaze, stone still among whispering trees. Then it returned to grazing, patient, steadfast, a silent sentinel against the wood's encroaching darkness. And though neither child could explain why, both felt the first fragile thread of hope tighten, white as the Mustang's mane, slender but unbreaking. An afternoon settled over whispering pines like a thin, cold quilt. Sunshafts slipped between high trunks, but carried little warmth. Ethan and Finn huddled beneath the same pine where they had first sat. The clearing around them felt larger now, emptier, an unfinished sentence waiting for its final dreadful clause. The twins had not dared stray from that open space. What if Dad came back and they were gone? What if he was lost and needed them to call out? Yet every minute made the silence more certain, every gust of wind more final. Ethan tested the weight of the duffel their father had shoved into his arms earlier. No food, only a blanket, a half-empty water bottle and a flashlight with dying battery. When he passed the bottle to Finn there was hardly a swallow left for each of them. A sharp breeze rattled branches overhead. Goose flesh prickled their thin forearms, and the boys drew their knees tighter. Finn's voice floated up, small as a drifting leaf. In the evening, How long until Dad comes back? Ethan tipped his chin and studied the pale sky as though it might answer. His arms slipped around Finn's shoulders in what was meant to be a reassuring hug, but his own body shivered so hard the gesture betrayed him. From the far side of the clearing, the white storm, still unnamed in their minds, raised its head. Sunlight glossed the curve of its neck, outlining muscle and quiet power. For hours it had remained near, drifting along the perimeter as though patrolling an invisible fence. Now it stopped grazing and stared directly at the children. Ethan noticed first. "It's looking at us," he whispered. The horse took a deliberate step toward a thicket of undergrowth, then paused, turning its head to be sure it had their attention. It nudged a low branch aside with its muzzle. When Ethan made no move, the animal repeated the gesture, almost emphatically, and tossed its mane in mild impatience. Finn blinked. "Is it calling us?" "Think so," Ethan said. He climbed to his feet, knees wobbly, and reached for his brother's hand. "Stay close, okay?" Together they followed the hoof prints the storm pressed into the soft floor, thread-like trails that wound through fern and fallen cone. At every twist, the horse looked back, ears forward, waiting. The path ended beside a dense briar patch bursting with dark, round fruit. Plump clusters of wild berries drooped from thorny canes, almost black in their ripeness. The smell, deep, wine-sweet, floated on the chilled air. The whisper halted and bobbed its head, as though saying, "Here, listen to the forest. It is kinder than you fear." Ethan stared, uncertain whether the berries were safe. Yet hunger gnawed more loudly than caution. He plucked one, rolled it between thumb and forefinger, then slipped it into his mouth. A rush of tart sweetness filled his cheeks. He smiled despite himself. "Taste like the jam Maggie makes," he said, voice bright again. Finn watched, then copied him, timid at first. Seconds later the twins were crouched, hands stained purple, popping berry after berry past cracked lips. Juice streaked their chins and laughter, thin but genuine, bubbled out for the first time since morning. When they remembered their silent guardian, Ethan gathered a small handful and held it up. The Mustang sniffed the offering politely but declined, merely flicking an ear in what felt like approval. Then it stepped back to grant them space, posture relaxed yet always alert. 15 minutes later, their bellies satisfied, Ethan used the water left in the bottle to rinse sticky fingers. Dusk, however, was closing in quickly, diluting colors into grays and drawing long, wary shadows across the forest floor. The sun brushed the treetops in a final amber farewell. Branches creaked overhead. Somewhere deeper in the woods a jay screeched and fell silent. Cooler air sank around the boys like water filling a basin. Finn's eyes widened at every rustle. "It's getting dark," he whispered, tugging Ethan's sleeve. "Where will we sleep?" Ethan scanned the woodland in tight circles. Everything looked the same: towering trunks, tangled roots, pockets of blackness between boulders. His own pulse thudded at the idea of stumbling through those corridors after nightfall. "Maybe we can build a little fort with branches," he suggested. But even he heard the shaky hope in his tone. Before panic could bloom, Whisper strode forward. The horse nudged Ethan's shoulder with a velvet muzzle, then ambled 10 paces to a gentle rise of ground near a massive pine, its roots curled like resting serpents. With slow, careful movements, the storm folded its forelegs, lowered its chest, and finally sank onto its side, legs tucked under. It released a low rumble, half sigh, half invitation. Ethan looked from the horse to Finn and back. "I think it wants us to stay close," he murmured. Finn's jaw dropped. Like a living blanket, the absurdity of the notion tickled them both. A round of nervous giggles escaped, rising into the twilight where they sounded impossibly brave. Ethan approached first, one hand extended. Whisper's flank rose and fell in steady cadence. Warmth radiated through its winter coat like heat from banked coal. Ethan lowered himself against the broad body, feeling the immediate comfort of fur beneath his cheek. He beckoned to Finn. Finn hesitated only a second before crawling under Ethan's arm. The boys sprawled lengthwise along the horse's barrel chest. Whisper did not flinch. Instead, the animal exhaled a deep, steady breath and closed its eyes. Every muscle a quiet promise of safety. Wind rattled branches above and the forest responded with a chorus of night. Distant owl hoots, a faraway coyote yip, the brittle snap of twigs beneath unseen paws. Each time a noise rose, the storm's ears swiveled, but its body remained rock still, shielding the children from the worst of the chill. Exhaustion swept over the twins. The sugar of berries dulled to a pleasant hum. The ache of fear seeped away in the blanket of equine warmth. Ethan tightened his arm when Finn shivered, pulling him closer. The steady drum of the horse's heartbeat beneath their ears became a lullaby older than language. They drifted, first Ethan, then the last thing either remembered was a whisper of moonlight sliding down the pine trunks like silver paint. Hours rolled over the forest. The moon climbed until it hovered above the treetops, casting its cool radiance on the improbable tree. From a distance the scene looked etched in blue and pearl. Two small figures curled against a white silhouette, all bathed in shifting latticework of branches. Once, perhaps near midnight, Whisper's eyes opened. The storm lifted its head just enough to survey the darkness. Ears pricked, nostrils dilated to test the wind. Somewhere far off, a fox barked. A pine cone fell with a dull thud. When no danger came, Whisper laid its head back down, but kept one eye half-lidded toward the shadow. The boys slept on, untroubled by dreams. Moon set inch toward dawn. In the hush before first light, a mild breeze coaxed the branches to sway. Silver dust drifted from the pines. Ethan stirred but did not wake. He only burrowed deeper against the warmth. If an oracle had stood at the edge of that clearing, she might have named the scene for what it would soon become. A parable passed from tongue to tongue in Willow County. The White Guardian, the living embodiment of loyalty unasked for, protection unearned but freely given. Yet no human witness watched that night. Only the forest noted the pledge writ in silence, that as long as the boys remained, the storm would remain also. And so, under the waning moon, an invisible bond sealed itself between two lost children and the wild heart that refused to leave them. A single ray of pale gold filtered through the canopy and brushed the white hide of the storm like a blessing. Ethan's eyelids fluttered. He lay curled against warm fur, the smell of clean horse and sun-baked needles in his lungs. For 3 heartbeats he had no memory, only the drowsy warmth of a strange new bed. Then yesterday crashed back. The road, the clearing, the berries, the slow-breathing wall of muscle that had sheltered them through the night. He propped himself on an elbow. Finn slept beside him, cheek pillowed on Whisper's flank, one small fist buried in the horse's mane. The scene looked stolen from a dream. Soft light, drifting mist, a guardian cut from moonstone keeping silent watch. Whisper shifted, careful not to disturb them, and exhaled a velvet sigh. Ethan watched the plume of breath dissolve, and felt a tightness in his chest, gratitude so fierce it hurt. He reached to brush a twig from Finn's hair, letting his hand rest a moment on his brother's ear, savoring the calm. A whisper of movement. Finn blinked awake, lips cracked and dry. "Ethan, I'm thirsty." "So am I." Ethan touched his own parched mouth. "Let's ask our guide." The Mustang had already risen, stretching 4 legs with a cat-like grace. It turned its head, ears forward, and walked toward a narrow animal trail. The invitation was unmistakable. Ethan helped Finn to his feet. "Stay close. He knows where the water is." They followed, stumbling a little on stiff legs through columns of pine, where early light painted every cobweb silver. 10 minutes later, a hush of running water reached their ear. The trail dipped and a brook revealed itself, clear as blown glass looping between stones and twisted roots. Finn knelt first, cupping both hands. Cold liquid shocked his tongue, chased dust from his throat and filled him with giddy relief. Ethan drank beside him, then splashed water on his cheeks until they stung. Whisper stepped to the bank and lowered its head, lips rippling the surface. For several minutes the only sounds were swallowing and the bright clink of water on stone. Ethan leaned back against a root, breathing deep. "We're a herd now," he announced, half joking, half serious. Finn grinned, wiping a wet sleeve across his face. "Best herd ever," he said, and for a moment it was true. Man, boy and horse, equal in thirst and satisfaction. Whisper lifted its muzzle, droplets falling like tiny diamonds. Then, without pause, it walked downslope toward a patch of dappled sunlight. The children followed and soon faced a squat tree, weighted with gold-green fruit. "Gov," Ethan gasped, remembering jars of sticky jam. Maggie had once sneaked them before dinner. He jumped, grabbed a branch and twisted free a soft sphere. A bite released juice down his chin. "Sweet," Finn giggled, peeled one carefully and tasted. His eyes widened. "Magic fruit," he declared. They sat cross-legged in the leaf mulch, devouring as many as hunger asked for. Sticky sap glued hair to foreheads. Juice stripes marked shirts and arms until they looked like small delighted savages. Whisper grazed a few yards away, ignoring the bounty as if its task stopped at provision, not partake. When the boys' stomachs finally protested,
Ethan gathered fallen seeds in his palm and held them out to the horse. Whisper sniffed, then brushed them aside with its whiskered chin, as if saying, "Those were always meant for you." Finn leaned against Ethan's shoulder, eyes bright with sugar and mourning. Fear felt distant now, as though some other children had lived it. Miles away, dawn leaked into the worn windows of Harris farmstead. Walt Harris had already split a rack of wood, fed the chickens, and poured his first cup of chicory coffee, when routine unsettled. The stall at the far end of the stable was empty. "First time in 15 years," he muttered, fingertips brushing the cool iron lat. Whisper, his one pride, his miracle rescue from a bureau roundup, had never failed to be home before nightfall, let alone vanish entirely. Walt whistled the come-ho call he'd used since the day the storm accepted a halter, then again loud.
No answering nicker. He fetched a flashlight and a coffee can half full of oats, rattling it along pasture fences. Nothing but the early caw of crows. Concern turned to an ache behind the ribs. He returned to the house for his emergency satchel, water, first aid kit, jerky, and removed an old lever-action rifle from above the door. Not for the horse, but for the coyotes and rogue dogs that sometimes prowled the state forest. He told Mrs. Ruth he'd be back soon, and set off along the Dusk grass toward the dark wall of whispering pines. By mid-morning, Walt had traced a faint set of unshod hoofprints down the north slope. At the creek, he found clearer impressions, and something else, tiny shoe marks printed beside the crescents. Children's shoes, no bigger than a man's palm. Now what in blazes? He breathed, heart thudding with puzzled alarm. He followed the tracks upriver, weaving through alder and dogwood. Voices reached him, a trill of childish laughter. Walt parted a tangle of bushes and stepped into sunlight. The image froze him, Whisper standing sentinel beside two berry-stained, dirt-matted boys, who could have walked out of a fairy tale. They looked healthy enough, but their faces told a harder truth, one Walt recognized from his years as volunteer fire rescue. They had seen something they should never have seen. Ethan spotted the old rancher first and instinctively pulled Finn behind him. Whisper turned his head toward Walt, ears relaxed, eyes questioning. Walt dropped his gaze, careful not to crowd. He removed his hat, ran calloused fingers across sparse white hair. In a low, steady voice he said, "Morning, boys. No need to fret," Whispers my partner. "Been so for a long time." The children didn't answer. Their bare feet stepped backward on stone. Walt addressed the horse instead. "So that's where you wandered off, eh? Found yourself company." Whisper blew softly and took 2 steps toward him as if to certify the claim. Walt risked another few yards forward, boots crunching gravel. "You fellas hungry?" he asked. "I've got bread in my bag and a pot of soup waiting at my place." His tone was the same one he'd once used to coax feral calves, patient, unthreatening. Ethan swallowed. "Who are you?" "Name's Walt Harris. Just an old cowboy who keeps this storm out of trouble." He offered a smile, "And I reckon you're long past breakfast." Finn's stomach answered with an audible growl. Ethan weighed possibilities. The man's eyes looked kind, the horse trusted him, and there was that word, soup, which floated warm and fragrant in the cold forest air. Ethan nodded once. Walt reached into his satchel, produced 2 thick slices of hard bread, and laid them on a rock before stepping back. The twins approached, sniffed, then devoured with grateful noises. Brugrams brushed away. Walt returned for home. Whisper fell in behind him. Ethan and Finn, hands clasped, followed. Sunlight brightened the path as though rewarding the decision. When Harris's farmstead crested into view, a patchwork of white fence, red barn, clapboard house puffing chimney smoke, the boys stopped, blinking at the vision. A golden retriever barked once, then wagged so hard his backbone wobbled. Mrs. Ruth stepped onto the porch, wiping floury hands on her apron. The sight of the children stunned her into stillness. "There with me, Ruth," Walt called in a gentle baritone. "Let's get them cleaned and fed." The old woman reacted instantly. "Boil water, wash basin on the porch," she murmured to herself, bustling back inside. By the time the party reached the steps, steam rose from a kettle and a stack of towels awaited. Finn shrank behind Ethan. Strangers and bright tablecloth kitchens had not treated them well in life. But Ruth's hands were steady and soft as she guided them to sit, sponge away grime and change into flannel shirts and corduroy trousers once belonging to Walt's eldest grandson. Fits like they were sewn for you, she crooned, snipping a loose thread. Ethan watched every gesture, half expecting the kindness to curdle. It never did. When Ruth ladled oat porridge into bowls and set out peanut butter toast still glistening with melted butter, the smell alone nearly toppled the boys from their chairs. They ate in silence at first, heads low over steam, tasting each bite as if it might vanish. Halfway through, Finn risked a whisper. "This place doesn't feel like home, feels better." Outside the window, Whisper grazed within view, periodically lifting its head to check the house. Late afternoon melted into evening. Walt repaired a splintered toy box from the attic so the boys would have a place for borrowed clothes. Ruth knitted 2 pairs of wool socks. Ethan helped stack firewood, determined to repay kindness. Finn drew a crayon picture of Whisper that Ruth pinned proudly on the fridge. At dusk, Walt led the boys to a small bedroom off the sitting room. A cast-iron stove radiated gentle heat. Quilts smelling of cedar lay folded at the foot of a short bunk bed. "Doors open if you need anything," he said. "I tend to keep a kettle going all night, old habit." Ethan peered through a window slit and saw Whisper pacing near the paddock. He cracked the sash an inch, cool air brushing his new socks. "He's right there," he whispered. Finn climbed onto the lower bunk. "He's guarding us. And so is Walt," Ethan added, though he used the name shyly as if testing its taste. Lamps were lowered. Floorboards creaked away for the first time in their lives, certainly since the nightmare began. The boys lay in soft beds under a roof built of affection instead of obligation. Ethan listened to the kettle whisper on the stovetop, the steady tick of a mantel clock, the distant snort of a contented horse. Peace soaked his bones. Before sleep captured him, he murmured, "We're not alone, Finn." His brother breathed a sleepy agreement. Outside, Whisper halted beneath the window, head high, ears tuned to any echo of the forest that had once tried to swallow his new herd. He would stand there a long time, until moonrise painted the paddock silver, and even then he would not wander far. Inside, 2 small hearts, once cracked by abandonment, began to knit back together, to the rhythm of a stranger's kindness and the hush of a storm's watchful breath. The first hint that the world had tilted came at 6:03 a.m. when the screen of Sierra Carter's phone remained stubbornly blank. Every morning since the twins were old enough to recognize a camera, Ethan and Finn sent her a little greeting. Sometimes a 3-second, "Hi Mom," video, sometimes a blurry selfie from the breakfast table. The ritual had survived flu seasons, bad Wi-Fi, and Richard Grant's simmering disapproval. Yet on this pale spring morning, in Sierra's modest Willow Creek apartment, the silence rang louder than any alarm. She brewed coffee, told herself to wait. 5 minutes, 10. At 6:15 she dialed Richard. 1 ring, 2. Voicemail. She left a breezy message, then tried again. Still nothing. A tightness coiled behind her ribs. Texting felt absurd, yet she typed anyway. "Morning. Haven't heard from the boys. All okay?" The dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared, and finally a reply landed. With a dull thunk. "They're fine. Trip with Dad." No emoji, no punctuation, no photograph to prove his claim. Just 8 curt words that tasted metallic in her mouth. Richard disliked having the twins on weekends. He tolerated them, the way a man tolerates a charity handshake in front of camera. And he had never, not once, kept them an extra night without making certain Sierra knew where they were. She called again, straight to voicemail. The coffee turned bitter on her tongue. Sierra spent the next hour shelving returns at Willow Creek Public Library, trying to convince herself she was overreacting. Yet each book's spine that slid into place felt like a tick of an invisible clock, counting down to something awful. At 8:27 she stepped into the break room and called Richard a 3rd time. This time he answered on the 2nd ring. His voice was rough, impatient. "They're still asleep. Stop worrying and mind your own business." Sleep? The twins never slept past 7. Their internal engines revved at dawn. Sierra pressed the phone tighter. The library around her seemed to warp. Fluorescent lights too bright. The faint whir of the HVAC too loud. Instinct, older, sharper than reason, screamed that her children were in danger. Sierra scribbled a 1-line note for the head librarian, pulled on her coat and bolted into the street. First Baptist Church sat 3 blocks south, a red brick building with a white steeple silhouette that framed every major memory in Willow Creek.
Sierra burst through the side door and nearly collided with Pastor James Collins in the hallway. The 63-year-old minister steadied her by the shoulders. Sierra. Towed. What on earth? Words tumbled out. Richard silenced the cryptic text. The call cut short. Pastor Collins guided her into his book-lined office. And listened. Face composed yet eyes storm dark. When she got to the part about Richard refusing to share their location, the pastor closed his Bible, fingers whitening around the leather. Sometimes, he said quietly, justice begins with the smallest phone call. He rose, motioned Sierra to stay seated, and disappeared into the adjoining study. Through the thin door she heard the faint whirl of a rotary dial. Then a voice, low and urgent, speaking to someone she couldn't hear. District Attorney Barnes will meet us within the hour, he said. You are not alone, Sierra. He tried to thank him, but only a cracked whisper emerged. District Attorney Linda Barnes was reading depositions when the pastor's call cut through her normal stoicism. At the names Sierra Carter and Richard Grant, she snapped a pen in two. 2 years earlier she had watched Richard manipulate a private cut divorce into silence, then push a sweetheart custody schedule through an intimidated family judge. Now she listened to Pastor Collins outline fresh alarm. Father unreachable. Children unaccounted for. Barnes had no warrant, no probable cause yet, but she knew a predator's first move was always the same. Sever the victim's line to help. Pastor, she said, I'll need more than suspicion to launch a search, but I'll start pulling threads. Tell Mrs. Carter I'm on it. The DA hung up and summoned her assistant for background files. At the same moment, 30 miles north, another thread tugged. Grant family estate lay silent except for a vacuum cleaner's hum. Maggie Thompson paused outside Richard's office. The door, usually locked, stood ajar. She slipped inside, heart banging like a misfiring engine. A quick search of drawers produced nothing, until she tried the bottom file cabinet. Locked. Maggie remembered the skeleton key kept for emergencies, fetched it and opened the drawer. A leather notebook sat on top of unrelated contracts. Blue ink notes jumped off the first page. Handle by board meeting, no loose ends. Keep off Wi-Fi, no cameras. Maggie's throat closed. She snapped photos of every page. Dates, diagrams, even a crudely hand-drawn map marked forest drop site. Then she emailed the files to the address Sierra had once pressed into her palm. In case you ever worry about the boys. Only when the progress bar hit 100% did Maggie allow herself to breathe again. Back in Willow Creek, DA Barnes scanned the email attachment on her phone and felt her skin crawl. Abandonment, conspiracy, premeditation. Enough probable cause for a county-wide alert. She called Sheriff Tom Daniels. The sheriff's first reaction was wary. Linda Grant donates more to our toy drive than anyone, and he's now the primary suspect in a potential double child abandonment. She cut in. If those boys die while you play politics, the press will roast us both. Sheriff Daniels exhaled a long, reluctant breath. What do you need? Find him fast. I've got a line on a credible witness. A rancher named Walt Harris. He phone dispatched this morning about 2 unidentified kids showing up on his land. I want eyes there 10 minutes ago. Walt had just finished mending a gate when the patrol truck rumbled up the drive. Sheriff Daniels climbed out, hat in hand. The scene on the porch would have melted the hardest skeptic. Ethan scattering feed for a flock of excitable chickens. Finn cross-legged on the steps sketching a white horse in blunt pencil strokes. Walt waved them inside, poured coffee for the sheriff, and told the whole odd story. Whisper missing. Hoof prints. The boys alone in the woods. Mains? Daniels asked, pen hovering. In pry, but the way the older one shields the younger. There's hurt there, real bad hurt. The sheriff rubbed his jaw. Would you sign a statement? Walt barked a soft laugh. Signed plenty after wildfire rescues. Pens in the hall. He didn't mention the rifle, or the fear he'd felt following those small footprints. The testimony would be heavy enough without. Within the hour, the sheriff's report hit Linda Barnes's desk. Confirmation. 2 minors, ages consistent with Ethan and Finn. Safe at a private farm. Barnes dialed Pastor Collins, who transferred the call to Sierra. The DA's voice was steady, official, but her words sparked like flint in the dark. We have a positive sighting, she said, but I'll need your sworn statement and we'll need to move quickly. Sierra squeezed the phone until her knuckles blanched. Tell me what to do. Come to my office. Bring every text, every call log, anything that shows Richard denied contact. and be prepared to authorize a welfare check. Sierra's nod was invisible yet seismic. For the first time in 30 relentless hours, hope glimmered, thin, tremulous, but alive. She grabbed her coat. The war for her sons had officially begun. Along quiet roads laced with dogwood in bloom, squad cars converged on Grant Estate. Detectives sealed Richard's study. Technicians mirrored his hard drive. At Harris Farmstead, Sheriff Daniels radioed that protective custody was en route for the twins. The pieces once scattered as autumn leaves and wind began sliding into place, pushed by a librarian's instinct, an old pastor's phone call, a housekeeper's bravery, a Mustang's loyalty, and a rancher's open door. No single gesture could solve the puzzle, yet together they formed a net that even Richard Grant's money and his malice could not slip through. In far from the swirling sirens within the warm kitchen of a farmhouse, Ethan smiled at Finn over a glass of cold milk, unaware that the tide had turned, that an army of strangers had chosen to love them back into the light. Richard Grant stood in the center of his paneled office, dead calm except for the violent twitch in his jaw. Walnut bookshelves rose around him like courtroom walls. The portrait of his great-grandfather seemed to lean forward, listening. A single text message glowed on the phone in his fist. "D.A. Barnes is on you." Sheriff report came from Old Man Walt's farm. "They've got the kids." The floor seemed to tilt. Richard's vision reddened, pulse slamming in his ears. He slammed the handset against the desk. Wood cracked, glass spiderweb. "Not one person," he growled, voice feral, "will burn down what I built." With trembling fingers he unlocked a hidden contact list and dialed a number stored only as cleanup. "Tonight," he hissed. "Harris Farmstead. 2 kids. Twin boys. Bring them out. No cops. No press. The rancher's old. Ignore him if you can. Silence him if you must. Double your normal fee." He rattled off GPS coordinates, then opened Maggie's household files to pirate the boys' day plan. Breakfast at 7. Chores at 9. Sketches on the porch by 3. He sent the document, then hurled the laptop across the room. It shattered against the wainscoting like brittle ice. Outside, fat storm clouds rolled over the Missouri hills, dragged by a restless wind, as if the sky itself felt the fracture in his world. Back at Harris Farmstead, afternoon lay warm and peaceful. Finn sat cross-legged on the porch, shading a new drawing of Whisper beneath a maple tree. Ethan scattered cracked corn for hens that clucked around his boots. Walt hammered a loose hinge on the barn door. Miss Ruth mixed biscuit dough in the kitchen. Whisper grazed inside the paddock, until every muscular line in the storm's body went rigid. His ears flicked backward, nostrils flaring at a scent carried on the gust. Oil, exhaust, sweat. A faint click, a boot on gravel behind the corn crib. Whisper's head snapped toward the sound. He threw it back and released a shrill metallic whistle that knifed through the placid air. Ethan jerked upright. "Whisper, what's wrong?" From the barn, Walt dropped his hammer. The cry was no everyday nicker. It was an alarm Walt had heard once before during a mountain lion raid years back. He ran into the yard, eyes tracking in every direction. A second rustle. Curt, human, too close. Walt saw a black-clad figure near the feed shed. "Ruth," he shouted. Ruth appeared at the kitchen door, flour up to her elbows. She took one look at Walt's face, grabbed Finn's wrist and hustled inside. Ethan sprinted after them, heart pounding as the front door slammed. Hidden beneath a braided rug in the parlor lay a trap door that led to an old tornado cellar. Ruth flipped it open. The air smelled of earth and cedar. Finn climbed down first, shaking. Ethan followed and Ruth pulled the hatch. Above them, Walt's heavy boots planted across the floorboards. Then came the scrape of furniture shoved over the door. Down in the dim space, the boys clasped hands. From far above, the storm's cry echoed again, this time lower, angry, promising fury. Storm clouds massed charcoal over the ridgeline. A black SUV, plates removed, crawled off the county road and idled behind a line of sycamores. Headlights off, 3 men stepped out, hoods up, scanning the property. "No dog," the tallest muttered. "Only a horse." The driver smirked. Lightning flared in distant clouds. They hopped the fence, boots squelching in soft turf, and froze. 50 yards ahead, a white shape blocked the path. Whisper, hooves planted, neck arched like a war stallion from myth. His eyes burned dark silver. Raindrops started to patter his mane. One thug laughed in advance. Whisper screamed, a sound ripped from primal nights, when horses outran wolves and charged. Hooves thundered the soaked ground. Mud flaying rearward. The first man stumbled backward. Dropped a taser. The second slipped in panic. His knee hit a stone and he yelped. The third cursed and fled. For the SUV. Rain sheeted down, thunder cracked. Whisper wheeled. Flanks heaving. Teeth bared. From the porch, Walt stepped into the storm. Sheriff's on his way. His voice boomed over the wind. Take one more step, and you'll answer to me first. Lightning licked the horizon. Fusillades of thunder rolled overhead. The intruders weighed risk versus paycheck, and began to retreat. They reached the vehicle. Just as red and blue strobes cut the dark, 2 patrol cruisers skidded sideways on wet gravel, high beams blanching the rain. A third car fishtailed behind. The district attorney herself riding shotgun, Sierra Carter beside her. Seatbelt forgot. When the convoy braked, Sierra flung the door open and plunged into the torrent. Then Finn, she cried, voice raw. Deputies tackled the fleeing kidnappers, cuffed them face down in mud. Linda Barnes soaked to the scalp, supervised with terse order. Walt hurried to the porch, heaved the dresser aside, and yanked open the trapdoor. It's safe now, son. A small head emerged, then another, muddy, pale but unhurt. Sierra sprinted across the yard, rain smearing her hair to her chin. The boys scrambled from the cellar and collided with her in one tangled embrace. Finn sobbed against her neck. Ethan held them both so fiercely his arms shook. Thunder rolled again, yet in the center of the tempest, mother and sons formed a still point of impossible peace. Deputies, thieves, lawyer, rancher all paused to witness that instant. The storm's roar dampened by the louder beat of reunited hearts. Linda Barnes approached Walt, rain drumming her shoulders. We've got enough for an arrest warrant, she shouted over wind. But we need the father on site. Walt gestured with his chin. Suck of the devil. Another pair of headlights slashed through rain. A dark sedan nosing up the drive, chased by an unmarked police SUV. The sedan braked. Doors opened. Men in suits dragged Richard Grant out, wrists already zip-tied, jacket thrown over his head. He stumbled, half-blinded, until deputies marched him beneath the porch light. There Sierra stood, arms still around her boy's soaked dress clinging to her frame. She did not spare him a single word. Richard's gaze flicked from his children, tear-streaked, wrapped tight around the woman he'd tried to break, to Walt, towering beside his white storm sentinel. In Walt's calm eyes he saw something colder than prison steel. Judgment rendered by a man who owed him nothing. Rain hammered the tin roof like 1,000 gavels. Sheriff Daniels read the charges. Child abandonment, conspiracy to abduct, solicitation of violence. Richard's shoulders sagged. Broader world finally crashing in. No board seat, no hush money. No lawyer could now erase the image of his sons clutching someone else for safety. Whispers snorted, as if to punctuate the verdict. Lightning strobed again. In its white flare, the storm looked enormous, almost mythical. An avatar of protection the wealthy father could never purchase, never tame. Deputies escorted Richard to the cruiser. Doors slammed. Engine lights swept away through rain. Sierra pressed her lips to each twin's forehead, tears lost in the downpour. Walt lowered his rifle, offered a hand she gripped with fierce gratitude. Let's get inside, he said, storm still angry. Whisper followed them onto the porch, water streaming off his mane, but calm now, duty complete. Inside, Mrs. Ruth wrapped the boys in quilts, heated by the stove. Walt fetched towels for everyone, even the DA. Thunder rolled outward, retreating beyond the hills, as if some cosmic switch had been thrown. Sierra looked at Ethan, then Finn. We're safe, she whispered, partly to herself, partly to the kitchen air, fragrant with wood smoke. No one contradicted her. Everyone in that room could hear the truth, in the steady breaths of two boys, who would never again wonder whether love would stop. Morning on Hare's farm came lightly, as though the sky itself tiptoed across the shingles, so it wouldn't wake the boys too soon. In their borrowed bedroom, Ethan opened his eyes first. Gray light slipped through gingham curtains. Beside him, Finn still twitched whenever a rooster crowed, but he no longer jerked upright with a They had been here 3 days since the storm, their mothers sleeping on the fold-out sofa in the parlor, Whisper pacing nightly outside their window like a silent watchman. The farmhouse smelled of wood smoke, and something sweet rising from Mrs. Ruth's oven. For the first time since Richard's abandonment, Ethan woke without that crushing moment of confusion. He knew exactly where he was, and that knowledge felt steady as a fence post. Downstairs, Walt waited with a lantern and 2 galvanized pails. Egg Petroli said, handing Ethan a basket the size of a football helmet. Ethan managed a shy grin. I remember. Careful not to jostle or they crack. Smart boy. Walt tipped his hat at Finn, who clung to the banister. You young artist. Can fetch the warm ones for Mrs. Ruth's biscuit. The henhouse was cool and dusty, alive with soft clucking. Ethan inched a hand beneath a broody hen and felt the fragile globe settle onto his palm. Finn squatted close, recording the moment in his head the way he did before putting anything to paper. Out in the yard, Whisper grazed, tail swishing, turning his head whenever the screen door creaked. He tolerated ribbons in his mane, now pink one day, blue the next. Patient as any old pony, even though he was still all Mustang under the skin. Breakfast was a quiet choir of gentle sounds. Spoons tapping enamel bowls, fire popping, Mrs. Ruth humming a hymn. Sierra sat at the table with coffee that no longer went cold in her shaking hands. She watched her children eat, cheeks flushed, and felt something in her unclench. The boys still woke from nightmares. She would feel Ethan crawl onto the couch beside her, trembling, and tuck him under the blanket without a word. But each dawn the shadows withdrew a little farther. Pulley, Mrs. Ruth had told her, flour dusting her hair like Sierra did not speak Vietnamese, yet somehow she understood every syllable. Young hearts need time to bloom again. The farm's rhythm became their medicine. At sunrise, Ethan followed Walt along fence lines, learning which knot held best in barbed wire and why you tested a gate latch twice.
Walt never used grand speeches. He simply trusted the boy with real work, and that trust filled Ethan like warm soup. Finn preferred the kitchen, where Ruth rolled dough and insisted good biscuits rose on kindness as much as baking soda. She let him punch the dough with floury fists, then shape it into clumsy hearts that baked lopsided but tasted fine. When trays cooled, she dabbed honey on the worst-looking ones and claimed they were chef's privilege. Mid-afternoon brought kite battles in the north pasture. Children from Willow Creek rode bikes up the lane, curious about the twins who had escaped the forest. At first, Ethan hovered behind the barn door, but one girl his age handed him a spool of twine and said, "Race you to the clouds." Soon laughter rose higher than any kite string, and Sierra, watching from the porch swing, realized she had not clenched her jaw all day. Whisper drifted through every scene like a benevolent goat. If Finn crouched in clover sketching, the Mustang lowered his head so the breeze wouldn't tear fresh pages away. If Ethan practiced balancing on a fence rail, Whisper stood nearby, one flank ready to catch him. The boys whispered secrets into the velvet cup of his ear. He never answered, yet somehow they always felt heard. News of the ordeal spread beyond county lines, carried by radio hosts who loved a miracle. Instead of gawking, neighbors arrived with casseroles and hand-me-down toys. The local grocer stocked Sierra's pantry for a month, slipping gift cards through the mail slot at dawn. Teachers from Willow Creek Elementary painted a vacant rental cottage yellow and white, then left flower boxes on its windowsill. It sat half a mile from Harris Farm, close enough for Walt to see when the porch light flicked on each evening. Walt drove the twins in his truck bed, Whisper trotting alongside the fence line all the way to the property boundary. Inside the new apartment, sunlight pooled on newly donated rugs. Sierra unpacked books. Finn tacked drawings of the Mustang and the kitchen wood stove onto fresh wall. Ethan opened the bedroom window, spotted the red roof of Walt's barn in the distance and sighed. Home over there. Home in here. Healing showed itself in small, unstoppable ways. Ethan began to narrate every chore to Finn, turning life into story, and the brave rooster guarded the kingdom of hens while the twins stole golden eggs. He asked Walt if someday he might ride Whisper bareback across the creek. The old rancher nodded once. When Whisper decides you're ready, son, he'll kneel the way he did that first night, not before. Finn filled a sketchbook in a week. Watercolor moons above pine silhouettes, a pair of stick-figured boys tucked against a gigantic horse, Ruth's stove glowing orange. When he taped the pictures over his bed, Sierra felt the room tilt toward brightness. She returned to the public library 2 mornings a week. Patrons whispered that Courage wore cardigan sweaters and shelved books with gentle hands. Sometimes, near midnight, she still padded down the hallway to check, 2 bundled shapes breathing slow, one arm flung over the other. But there were no more whimpers, no more phantom footsteps fleeing into darkness. She kissed each brow, whispered a promise, and went back to sleep. Exactly 1 month after the storm, Willow Creek threw a birthday party no 6-year-old could fathom. The sun shone as if it had RSVP'd, lanterns hung from the big cottonwood behind Walt's barn, tables sagged under pies, jars of lemonade, little carved horses painted white and silver. Ethan and Finn each wore a check shirt Ruth had sewn from leftover feed sack cloth. One blue, one green. Whisper wore a satin bow as wide as a river. Children sang, adults clapped. Time, and Ethan blew out 6 candles on a vanilla cake, shaped like, what else? A storm. He closed his eyes so tight his lashes quivered, then breathed a slow wish into the flames. When he opened them, the grin stretching his face said the wish had already come true. Night settled soft and warm. Fireflies blinked above the pasture. Someone strummed a guitar. Whisper grazed beneath fairy lights, until Ethan padded across the grass, pressed his forehead to that broad white neck, and whispered, "Thank you for staying." If the lion's skin understood, he gave no sign, only lifted his head, ears swiveling toward the house where Sierra laughed with new friends, where Finn displayed sketches of hope, and where the word family had grown so large, it wrapped the entire farm in quiet, luminous safety. The courthouse in Willow County looked older than the war, a Greek revival block of white stone that usually heard zoning disputes and the occasional burglary play. That morning it thrummed like a beehive. Reporters lined the steps. Advocates for foster children handed out blue ribbons. Farmers in their Sunday boots stood shoulder to shoulder with college students who had driven in from Springfield after reading the headline, "Father Charged with Abandoning Twins in Forest." Inside, the air held the dry bite of copier toner and expectation. Sierra Carter stepped through the scanner first. She wore a plain gray dress, neither widowed dark nor joyful. It cast no vote except for seriousness. In her left hand she clasped Ethan's small fingers, in her right Finn's twin boys, in miniature navy suits. Hair slicked until it shone. They passed pew-like benches where Walt Harris, hat folded respectfully in his lap, sat beside Mrs. Ruth and Pastor James Collins. The old rancher gave the boys a wink. Finn's shoulders dropped a fraction. At the defense table Richard Grant waited, wrists cuffed and face carved from granite. It was his first public sighting since deputies hauled him off Walt's porch during the storm. Photographer's shutters clicked. He did not flinch, but when his eyes met Ethan's for a breathless instant, something troubled flashed, then vanished behind corporate stone. The bailiff intoned, "All rise," and the room obeyed. District Attorney Linda Barnes stood straight and unhurried, her charcoal suit the color of scorched paper. "The state will show that Richard Charles Grant, father of these 2 minor children, did deliberately abandon them in Whispering Pines woods, contracted private muscle to recapture them, and used personal influence to obstruct every lawful attempt to protect them." She lifted 3 manila folders, dropping each onto the lectern with a precise thunk. Count 1, abandonment of minors. Count 2, conspiracy to commit child abduction. Count 3, abuse of influence and obstruction of justice. Screens lit with scanned pages. Richard's blue ink notations photographed by Maggie. Eliminate risk factors before board presentation. No cameras. Drop sight. Clear. You'll have your turn, counselor. Maggie Thompson shuffled to the stand first, hands clasped in her apron, as though she still carried crumbs from the estate kitchen. She spoke of hidden birthdays, of guests who never saw the boys, of photos deleted before investors toured the house. Miss Grant called them PR liabilities. "Sir," she told the jury, voice trembling yet clear. He said children complicate perception. DA Barnes directed her to the notebook. Maggie identified the handwriting. Defense tried to paint her as a disgruntled employee. Barnes merely asked, "How long did you stay after photographing those pages?" Maggie's eyes filled. "Until the boys were safe, ma'am, then I handed in my keys." Next came your Walt Harris, plaid shirt, bolo tie, truth as blunt as his fence post. He recounted Whisper's midnight disappearance, the footprints beside the creek, the sight of 2 mud-caked boys eating guavas under the storm's watch. When he declared, "Ain't no question that horse saved him," half the gallery smiled through tears. Barnes displayed a time-stamped frame from Walt's security cam, Whisper pacing at 1:14 a.m. stall door,
swinging empty behind him. The timeline matched the hour Richard's SUV entered the forest. Finally, Sierra took the oath. She did not cry. The court reporter's keys clacked beneath her testimony like distant hail. Richard had blocked her calls, threatened her with court costs, dangled visitation like a ransom. "I wasn't divorcing a husband," she said, eyes forward. "I was divorcing an image." The jury scribbled. The bailiff opened a side door and gasps fluttered as the twins stepped out clutching a plush bear between them. A special juvenile stand awaited. Small table, crayons, stress balls. Judge Whitlow removed his glasses, softening features weathered by decades on the bench. Ethan sat first, heels not quite reaching the footrest, hands folded. He glanced at Finn, who nodded encouragement. "Do you promise to tell the truth?" the clerk asked. "Yes, sir," Ethan answered, voice shaking. Barnes approached and knelt to eye level. "No tricky questions, just share what you remember." Ethan inhaled. "Dad said he had a surprise. We waited in the trees. He drove away and never came back." "Was it day or night when he left?" "Morning. The sun hurt our eyes." Finn slid the stuffed bear onto the rail. "If Whisper hadn't found us, we'd be lost still," he whispered. Barnes placed a hand over her heart, then stood. No further questions. Not a soul spoke. Many dabbed eyes. Every juror watched Richard Grant, searching maybe for remorse. There was fright, yes, and a gray film of shame, but no apology. After lunch recess, defense counsel surprised everyone by calling Richard himself. Even Barnes raised a brow. She knew defendants rarely survived their own cross-exams. Batcherin rose, chains clinking, and faced the court. "I regret the outcome," he began, voice ragged as gravel. "I miscalculated risk. I wasn't trying to harm Ethan and Finn. He faltered. I can't be the father they deserve." He confessed that bored investors required a clean domestic profile. He admitted hiring men to reclaim the boys before news spread. Yet every line sounded like an executive explaining quarterly losses. When he finished, silence smothered the room. No booze, no applause, only the faint sniffle of a reporter and the rustle of paper as the judge prepared instructions. Deliberation lasted 45 minutes. The forewoman, a retired nurse, read the verdict without tremor. "Guilty on all counts." Judge Whitlow delivered sentence immediately, voice steady, uncompromised. 5 years in state custody, eligibility for parole after 3. No contact with the minors until they reach 18 or petition otherwise. Restitution for counseling, education and living expenses shall be satisfied through liquidation of designated assets. Said assets will seed the Ethan and Finn Carter Scholarship Fund for children affected by parental neglect. Richard's shoulders sagged, but he said nothing. Deputies led him away. One vest button caught on the rail, popped loose, skittered across the floor like a spent shell. Outside, noon sunlight poured down the courthouse steps. Sierra gripped her son's hands and paused where marble met pavement. Flashbulbs erupted, yet for the first time, they did not make Ethan flinch. "So, it's over?" he asked. "It's beginning," Sierra replied, kneeling to their height. "From today forward, no one decides your worth but you." Finn tilted his head. "Are we free?" A smile, soft as May wind, unfurled on her lips. "Yes, baby, free, and never to be left behind again." Across the plaza, Walt waited by his pickup, Mrs. Ruth waving a thermos of cocoa. Pastor Collins lifted 2 fingers in blessing, and somewhere beyond city roofs, a white storm grazed under blue sky, unbranded, unbroken, forever the witness, who would not look away. A week after the verdict, Harris Farmstead woke to the click-clack of Walt's hammer. He had dragged an oak plank from the old hayloft, sanded it smooth, and carved 5 words along the grain in blocky, patient letters. He set the sign beneath the sprawling live oak that shaded the paddock exactly where the storm liked to stand and watch the western field. When Ethan and Finn darted out to investigate, Walt handed them a tray of leftover house paint, white for the letters, sky blue for whatever decorations their hearts invented. They added hearts, 2 smiling stick faces, and a crooked horseshoe. Walt chuckled. If he could read boys, he'd puff that chest of his clear to Kansas. The plank, no bigger than a mailbox lid, became the farm's first unofficial landmark. Word of the sign, and the story behind it, traveled faster than seed in wind. A local reporter photographed Whisper against a flaming sunset. Headline, "Storm Who Saved Twins, Now Town Hero." Animal rescue blogs reposted. A regional TV crew arrived with a boom mic that startled the hens and made Finn giggle. Before long, families began rolling up the gravel lane just to glimpse the white horse that had done what armed men could not. On Saturdays, the driveway filled with minivans. Adults stepped out carrying paper bags of apples, carrots, or foiled cobs of roasted corn. Children shuffled in single file toward the fence. Some reached out timidly, others squealed when Whisper's warm breath fogged their fingers. The storm accepted every gift with a dignified nod, but his gaze kept drifting beyond the crowd, as though guarding possibilities only he could sense. A young father, jeans soaked with toddler drool, lifted his boy to eye level with the horse. "I brought him," the man told Walt, "because school can teach math, but loyalty, real loyalty, needs a living example." Walt just tipped his hat. He had never heard a compliment that felt so true. The town's institutions soon wove the tale into lesson plans and sermons. Willow Creek Elementary scheduled a field trip, 63rd graders piling out of a yellow bus, notebooks ready. The principal stood beside Whisper's paddock and spoke louder than the restless hoof. "Readers, writers, listeners, remember that good stories change the world, but great kindness saves it." At his signal, the children released a cheer that rippled through the cottonwood leaves. Pastor James Collins arrived the following Sunday with 24 youth group volunteers and a crate of folding chairs. Under the oak, he delivered a short homily titled, "Guarding the Innocent." He quoted Proverbs, "A faithful friend is a sturdy shelter," then pointed to the shelters. He said, "Come in unexpected shapes." The county library mounted an exhibit in the lobby. Finn's watercolor of Whisper haloed by moonlight above two sleeping boys, enlarged and feather-framed. Visitors slipped notes beneath the frame. "You reminded me why I rescue stray. I left my children once. This helped me ask forgiveness." One afternoon, an elderly woman arrived alone. She walked stiffly to the paddock, breath shallow, and laid a bundle of wildflowers at the fence. Walt approached, hat in hand. The woman's gaze never left the horse. "I was abandoned during the war, 1945, she said, voice almost wind. "It took me 80 years to say the word forgive. Today I can." Whisper lowered his head as though hearing some subterranean melody, and the woman touched his forelock with trembling fingers. She left, smiling through tears. No town meeting proclaimed Whisper a monument, yet the effect was the same. Hardware store clerks swapped stories with dairy farmers. Bloggers interviewed coal plant foremen. Strangers met at the paddock and left knowing one another's name. The storm's stillness became a kind of civic square, where worry slowed and hope changed hands. Ethan and Finn watched this gentle bloom of goodwill with widening eyes. They handed out carrots, explained which ribbon color fit Whisper's mood, and thanked children who mailed homemade cards. Every evening they walked the fence line and counted hoof prints in the dust, as if tallying blessings. On dusk, Sierra joined Walt at the porch rail, town lights blinking like low stars beyond the pasture. "I feared the scandal would stain them forever," she admitted. Walt shrugged. "Paint over rot. It peels. Cut out rot. Fill with love. It holds." In the paddock, Whisper lifted his muzzle to the scent of night-blooming jasmine. Willow Creek had suffered its share of hard headlines. Lost factories, meth busts, storms that flattened roofs. But the storm's quiet vigil gave people a story that didn't bruise. It mended. It reminded them that when abandonment screamed, steadfastness could answer, and that sometimes the steadiest voice belonged to an animal who spoke only in the language of stay. In the months that followed, the oak plank sign weathered sun and rain, the blue hearts fading to powder. Walt considered repainting, but Ethan shook his head. "Let it look old," he said. "It shows how long he's been here." Walt smiled. He understood. Some symbols gain power not in polish, but in endurance. Wood grain rough beneath a child's palm, letters tracing a promise that outlives the pain that birthed it. So the sign stayed, and Whisper stayed, and the town kept coming. Proof that hope once tethered can graze forever on the open fields of memory. The September dusk settled over Harris Farm like a quilt, warm and speckled with the scent of cut hay. After supper, roast chicken and Walt's sweet-tasted pumpkin. Finn wiped gravy from his chin, turned to the rancher, and asked a question that felt small on his lips, yet thunderous in his chest. "Mr. Walt, can I call you Grandpa?" The old man paused midway through pouring iced tea. His eyes slid to Sierra, then to Ethan, who sat frozen with anticipation. A slow smile tugged the silver of his mustache. "If that's what your heart wants," he said, voice hushed as barn loft dust. Then I'll be Grandpa Walt as long as it beats. Ethan's grin broke like sunrise. He twisted toward the kitchen doorway where Mrs. Ruth emerged, balancing a peach cobbler. And you're Grandma Ruth. 'Cause no other grandma on TV bakes this good. The cook's laughter rattled the pie dish. Lord help me if a title comes with extra cuddles, I accept. From that night forward, the new names fit as naturally as boots to feet. Grandpa Walt, Grandma Ruth, Mom, the twins. 4 puzzle pieces that somehow left no gap. A week later, Sierra found herself in a quiet alcove of Willow Creek Library, rereading the same paragraph 3 times while Pastor James and Linda Barnes discussed a children's literacy fundraiser. At last she closed the novel, fingers marking the page. When I left Richard, she confessed, I thought I'd blown my son's idea of family to ashes. Her voice shook. The admission was heavy, but she let it land. Turns out, she continued, eyes glistening, family isn't blood. Family is who stays when the lights go out, who chooses you without obligation. Pastor James pressed her hand, weathered palms meeting ink-smudged knuckles. Amen, he said. Nothing more was required. Linda Barnes pushed her glasses up the ridge of her nose and offered a rare smile. Sierra breathed easier, as though the library's columns widened to hold her expanding sense of belonging. Meanwhile, Whisper held his own vigil of loyalty. The storm refused to wander beyond Harris fencing, yet he seemed to own perfect knowledge of the Carter schedule. Each Friday afternoon, 15 minutes before the twin sneakers appeared at the lane, he claimed a post by the front rail and waited, still as alabaster, until tiny voices drifted on the breeze. The first Saturday after a slate-gray nightmare woke Finn crying, Whisper ambled across the paddock and laid his head on the boy's shaking shoulder. Ethan, watching later, whispered into that velvet ear, if not for you, my brother wouldn't be here. The storm flicked one ear, accepting neither praise nor argument, only the eternal commission of standing guard. Walt overheard and stroked the snowy mane. Some creatures, he murmured, aren't born to be ridden. They're born to redeem. Life, once shattered, grew outward like vines finding a trellis. Grandma Ruth began teaching Sierra the fine art of biscuit layers. Fold, never stir. Butter must be colder than heartache. Flour dust duels left both women giggling like schoolgirls. In the yard, Grandpa Walt coached boys on splitting firewood, Ethan swinging too wide, Finn setting logs with a gravity far beyond his ear. Sundays became ritual. Sunrise at Sierra's cottage, 10-minute walk to the farm, a chorus of rooster hymn and children's chatter. Rainy afternoons meant whittling sticks by the stove, or tracing maps for a pumpkin patch the twins planned to plant in spring. Each night Sierra scribbled in her journal, we do not share a surname. We share soup on cold nights, quilts beneath thunder, and a porch light that waits until every soul is safely home. She closed the book, listening to soft breaths in the next room. 2 silhouettes curled together in sleep, hearts no longer braced for abandonment, but beating to the cadence of footsteps that always returned. Outside, beneath a sweep of constellations, Whisper patrolled the fence line. He paused once, nostrils tasting the frost-tinged air, and gazed toward the cottage window, where children dreamed unbroken dreams. The storm lowered his head, as if to promise the night itself that he would remain, as guardian, as symbol, as family of a most extraordinary kind. The first crisp morning of October carried promise on its breath. Inside Willow Creek Public Library, rows of reporters, social workers and townspeople crowded between reference stacks, waiting for District Attorney Linda Barnes. She strode to the podium, notes in hand, eyes bright with a rare, private triumph. Today, she announced, voice echoing under the vaulted ceiling, the civil forfeiture of Richard Grant's personal assets is complete. The proceeds, $5 million, seed the Ethan and Finn Carter Education Fund. These resources will cover tuition, books, and living costs for the Carter twins, through age 22, and beyond that will underwrite scholarships for any Willow County child abandoned or abused by a parent. At the back of the room, Sierra knelt, arms wrapped around her boys as if they might float away in the applause.
Her tears weren't for the money, they were for the way strangers now guarded her children as fiercely as she did. Beside her, Walt Harris removed his hat, head bowed, not in prayer exactly, but in solemn recognition that, from this hour forward, Ethan and Finn would never again be counted among the forgotten. 2 weeks later, maple leaves blazed like bronze coins across the hills, and Harris Farmstead awoke to festival fever. Every neighbor who could bake, carve, or hammer had volunteered. By noon, bunting fluttered above the pasture, and 100 paper lanterns dangled from the great oak near Whisper's paddock. Ethan, buttoned into a green and blue check shirt, helped Grandpa Walt arrange the biggest table clock he'd ever seen. Finn skipped between guests, showing them where to pile pies and gingerbread. Even the local sheriff arrived, off-duty and bearing a wooden hobby horse he'd whittled himself. Whisper stood immaculate, coat brushed until it shone like pearl, tail braided with ribbons, and a round cedar badge over his chest, hero of the heart. Each time a breeze rattled the oak, the badge clicked gently against his ribs, as though the wood itself whispered, "Well done." When the crowd finished a rousing happy birthday, Ethan and Finn squeezed their hands and leaned close to blow out 6 flickering candles. Cheers burst, confetti fell. Ruth snapped a photo that would later live above the farmhouse mantel. Sierra wiped her cheeks, laughing at her own tears. Then Finn tugged her sleeve and offered a lumpy parcel, wrapped in yesterday's newspaper comics. "It's for you, Mom." Sierra unfolded the paper. Crayon colors spilled across cardstock. 2 small boys curled beneath a wide-branched tree, a white Mustang standing sentinel, muzzle angled towards shadowed woods beyond. The entire scene glowed silver under a drawn moon. "It's my dream from last night," Finn whispered. "I drew it so we never forget." He pressed a trembling kiss to his temple. "I never will, sweetheart, and you'll never be alone again." Walt cleared his throat, pretending to fuss with the cake knife. Ruth dabbed her eyes and murmured, "Love that fierce could mend the whole planet." Long after the last lantern was snuffed and neighbors rumbled down the lane, soft laughter still lingered in the grass. Overhead, surviving lanterns glowed gold, their light dripping like syrup onto the tired birthday table. Across the paddock, Whisper remained motionless beneath the oak, chest broad, ears tilted to the hush of cricket. Even at rest, he looked vigilant, as if one more miracle might be required before dawn. Sierra followed his gaze to the starlit slice of sky, then lowered her eyes to her son's. "You know," she said, voice low, "love is when someone chooses to stay, even when they don't have to." Ethan hummed, sleepy but certain, "And if they stay long enough," he added, "they become family." Finn nodded, eyelids drooping, head settling against her ribs. Cricket song rose, steady and behind them Walt knocked dishes in the sink while Ruth hummed a lullaby, older than the farmhouse walls. Sierra tightened her embrace, breathing the grassy scent of her children's hair, and felt the last fragment of exile slip from her heart. Under the quiet watch of a storm who refused to abandon hope, the world had broken and remade itself. Proof that cruelty could be outlived, that strangers could become kin, and that sometimes the truest home was the one built by staying. Whisper exhaled, warm breath pluming in the cool dark. Satisfied, he lowered his head to graze, certain that the night and the family were finally safe. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. We'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know your favorite part. If you enjoyed the journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories like this one. And don't miss out. Hit the notification bell so you're always updated on our latest content. Your support truly means the world to us. The fire crackled softly as Storm stood watch near the twins, their breaths steady in the cold night. Silas looked on from the shadows, the weight of past decisions bearing down on him like a storm of its own. But in this quiet moment, something shifted. The silence wasn't empty, it was full of forgiveness, of second chances, of the strength that grows in broken places. Marigold placed a hand on his shoulder. No words were needed. Their family, scattered and bruised, was finding its way back. And for the first time in years, Silas didn't feel lost. He felt home.